Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Swami Jyotirmayananda Society, our journey to self-realization. Please subscribe our channel for the mystical meanings and to enjoy daily satsang. We are currently exploring the book Yoga Essays for Self-Improvement, authored by Swami Jyotirmayananda, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So today we are picking up a profound chapter of how to cultivate positive samskaras. Samskaras, or impressions of the unconscious, constitute the secrets of one's personality. If these impressions change for the better, your whole personality changes towards the positive. But if these impressions become negative, your personality finds itself in a world of misery. According to yoga, samskaras give rise to vasanas. Vasanas are subtle inclinations or subtle desires, which in turn give rise to vrittis or tiny waves of desire. Vrittis are then nourished by one's egoistic imagination, and in this way they turn into definite desires. If these desires are frustrated, they turn into cravings, which lead the human being to increasing bitterness, and if they are fulfilled, they lead to feelings of sweetness from the world. These experiences then give rise to further impressions of samskaras, and thus the cycle continues. Samskaras, vasana, vritti, kama, karma, bhoga. So it becomes a perpetual cycle. From the samskaras, there arise the vasanas, subtle desires, vrittis, thought waves, tiny thought waves, and then the action comes out of it, and then we indulge in a physical action, we do karma, and then we have to bear the fruit of that action, positive or negative, and that goes in the subconscious. Thus the cycle continues. So, an aspirant must break this cycle. He should promote good samskaras, which give rise to good vasanas, leading to good vrittis or tiny waves of spiritual aspiration. Spurred by meditation, reflection, and inquiry, these tiny waves grow into strong aspiration for spiritual unfoldment. And finally, an aspirant will be able to gather divine impressions from the world. Gathering positive impressions is not dependent on favorable conditions in the world. Generally, those who are immature on the spiritual path complain that they could have developed positive impressions if it were not for all the negative people around them. Indeed, it seems logical to the human mind that if there were nothing but sweetness in one's surroundings, positive impressions would then form. If there were nothing but a soft spring breeze and the gentle whisper of pleasant words and perfect heavenly conditions, the gathering of good impressions would be easy and spontaneous. No doubt. However, such is not the case. Life doesn't work like that. It goes with its ups and downs. If there is no challenge from the outer world, one cannot draw the impressions of goodness and spiritual grandeur. No one can gather impressions of heroism without entering into a battle and fighting. In order to cultivate positive impressions, a changed attitude within is needed, not a changed world outside. One needs to fight the battle of life and thus promote impressions of goodness, faith, and devotion, of the joy of perceiving divine presence everywhere, and the bliss of inner spiritual expansion. An aspirant is a gatherer of flowers. He enters the forest of the world, and although passing through thorny bushes and encountering various obstacles, he gathers the heavenly flowers of divine virtues. Then, leaving the forest, he soars into the realms of the heaven, even like a swan. So, the following points are important in gathering good impressions. Number one, just as white cloth receives dye much more effectively than an already colored one, A purified mind becomes receptive to impressions that are good and sublime. Purify your mind by the practice of selfless service of humanity, repetition of divine name, study of scriptures, and association with the wise teachers, spiritual preceptors, gurus, divine masters in satsang. Your mind will then become a magnet, drawing to itself the highest form of impressions from this transient world. But on the other hand, if the mind continues to be dominated by rajas and tamas, that is passion and inertia, it will draw impressions of attachment and hatred, pride and vanity, bitterness and violence, greed and passion. If this continues without being checked, it will promote increasing negative impressions, which are the cause of repeated births and deaths, as well as long lingering movement in the world of Maya or illusion. Thus, we should develop purity or sattva. Do not be discouraged. Number two, if you are unable to succeed in your efforts, don't give up. Have patience. In spite of repeated failures, you must continue to strive to gather divine impressions. You must develop an insight into the fact that even the minutest effort on your part is never wasted or futile. Remember when you were a baby learning how to walk? How many times you fell? But each time you got up and made another attempt, and soon you started walking, then running. Spiritual movement can be best depicted in the form of a three-dimensional spiral. Even though you may feel that you have gone backwards, you are still in a better plane than before. You are spiraling your way to the divine self. So it's a progressive movement. Have patience, have faith, and put in your self effort. Often, it is seen that an aspirant who was insensitive in the beginning to the limitations around him becomes oversensitive to them after a little practice of spiritual discipline. He begins to recognize much disorder and bitterness around him, which discourages him from pursuing the spiritual path. It is much like a doctor treating a patient for his blindness. As the person gradually begins to see more and more, he becomes aware of the cobwebs and other ugly things that have accumulated in his house. Then, instead of being joyous with the recognition of the fact that he is gaining healthier eyesight, out of ignorance, he begins to blame the doctor and to complain against his treatment. So, too, when one's personality is slightly healed of its spiritual blindness, he begins to see many disorders and discrepancies in the world. But this should not discourage a person, rather, he should continue to pursue his sadhana or spiritual discipline until the spiritual vision is fully restored and the world is seen as a glorious manifestation of the divine self. Develop an insight into the law of karma is point number three. Do not blame people around you for their misery, for your own misery. Theirs, of course, they have it, but even for you, don't say he did it, she did it. You point one finger, three point back at us. If you lack this insight, you will continue to develop impressions of raga and dvesha, which are attachment and hatred based upon pleasant and painful objects of the world. Human beings are spirits playing different roles in the drama of the world process. Friends are not friends, and enemies are not enemies. With this insight, an aspirant begins to gather impressions of vairagya or detachment. The mind becomes increasingly balanced and no longer swings to attachment or to hatred. In a balanced mind, the intellect becomes subtle and soon it blossoms into intuition. The world is then stripped of its Maic illusion, that is the veils, and is seen as the surging ocean of divine glory. Thus, an aspirant should continue to amass the treasure of, excuse me, um, treasure of good samskaras day by day. He must have immense patience and tenacity in his movement. He must develop increasing faith in the saving grace of God. At the time of death, he who has been the flower gatherer from the gardens of the world begins to behold heavenly gardens before his inner eye. The entire atmosphere will be filled with, excuse me, will be filled with divine fragrance. The thought of God will be the only dominating mental perception during his death, and in turn gives him a momentus that does not allow him to return to the earth plane anymore. Get liberated, self realized in this very life. This is Swami Nikhilananda. In tomorrow's satsang, we will be picking up develop presence of mind. Hari Om Tat Sat.